Join us today for this webinar on effective remote working. It's part of a new series of webinars that we have put together at the BC Center for Work and Family to help keep our members and colleagues in touch and connected with each other as we all grapple with this COVID-19 crisis together. And just in the spirit of human connection, I just wanted to share that the necklace that I'm wearing is one that I got in Italy a couple years ago when I visited Venice. So I'm keeping it close to my heart today just to think about all of the folks in Italy and all across the world who are dealing with this crisis. And we're seeing this as an important moment for us to stay connected, but always keeping in mind that everyone is in this all together. So this will be one of many webinars that we'll be offering in the next few weeks. And when we wrap up at the end, I'll share some of the other programming that's coming up with you. But we're really excited about this particular webinar today because most of you are now remote working, whether you have done so in the past or not, and also helping your managers and employees deal with this very rapid shift to remote work. So we're really pleased to be able to offer this session today with someone who we respect very much and have enjoyed knowing over the past few years. So Brad, did you want to take a minute to introduce Cali to the group?
Sure. I think I want to say this is a person who needs no introduction because Cali was one of the first really great kind of consultants and educators that I got to know when I started in the field back in the early 2000s. Cali, maybe I'm dating you. Maybe you're younger than that.
No, I'm afraid not. In fact, I think we may have even met in the 90s, but I don't know. Let's just not say anything.
We were in college at the time, Cali,
Yeah,
I'm sure.
yeah.
But Cali has certainly been somebody who, over the years, has been one of the really great spokesmen in our field. And she's the author of a couple of books. One was on, really coined the term work-life fit, which I think all those people who've been in the field too long and spend all their time debating whether balance is a good word or not, I think work-life fit, just no pun intended, just fit perfectly in terms of describing what we're all looking for and what organizations are trying to help us get to. And then her other book was on Tweak It, and it was really on the small changes I think we can make in order to kind of emphasize the positives and our priorities in life, and it doesn't necessarily have to take a drastic change to do that. Sometimes it's just a matter of some small tweaks. So Cali is coming to us live from Chatham, New Jersey, in her temporary arrangements, not because of COVID-19, but because of a house, reconstruction project. And I was just saying to Cali at the beginning, isn't there ever a good time to do a house project when she thought that it would just be her husband and she, and that her two daughters would be off in college somewhere, but instead they're all nice and cozy in a small temporary housing. So Cali, thanks so much for joining us. And just make two quick points. One is, as soon as we get through kind of Cali's sort of the thoughts that she's framing to help us, we really want to move into a conversation mode. So we'll switch the screen and make sure that as many of you as possible are on the screen so we can have a more conversational kind of approach rather than just a presentation. And that's what Cali was really anxious to do. And the second thing, we certainly, this particular topic about remote work and all that is so pertinent to right now, as all of us are probably sitting in our bedrooms or our living rooms doing this. But I think we'll talk about remote work, in general as well, because, once this is over, it doesn't mean that the desire or the benefits of remote work are going to disappear, as you guys know. So some of the points we might touch on will not just be related to this time, but also good tips for remote work, regardless of the circumstances and situation. So with that, let me introduce my good friend, Cali.
Oh, thanks, Brad. Thank you very much. Thank you, Jennifer and Victoria, for having me as well. And hi, everybody. I can't wait to see everybody's faces on the screen because I think I'm going to see a lot of old friends. And that's what's so wonderful about being here with all of you today. I just know we've all been doing this work for a very long time, and this is just a very unique moment in that progression. And hopefully today I'm going to share some of my thoughts, what I'm seeing right now, what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, and what I'm sharing with organizations. And then I really want to hear from all of you and hear what you're seeing and hearing as well. And again, as we make it through this this phase, and as Brad said, and beyond, because this is temporary. I know it's hard to keep that top of mind because right now it's such a crisis mode in organizations, and this is such a rapid pivot. It is a rapid, extreme change that everybody's having to adapt to, but at some point this will come to an end and we will reset back to, I don't know yet what that new normal will be, but we will get to the other side. But in the meantime, how do we help organizations make that rapid pivot? Now, these are, I'm sharing with you 10 sort of steps / tips that I've been sharing with organizations and broadly. I've nuggeted them down to these 10. There's many other things we could say, but I just want to focus on these for a minute. And I'm going to have Brad and Jennifer and Victoria send these out to all of you afterwards, but then you can read them at your leisure. But what I want to just say is the first one about mapping out jobs and tasks and then dividing non-remote employees into A and B teams. I want to just say two things about this. The first one, mapping out jobs and tasks, why that's an important first step still, is there are still managers that I am hearing that are resisting actually supporting remote work in a real fundamental way. They're sort of saying, sure, work from home, but then don't really put the process in place to allow that to happen in a comfortable way for people. And part of what I think is happening is they just don't know how to think through what part of a job can be done remotely and what can't. They're very stuck in what they believe the limitations are. And they just don't know how to parse it out. And then the next step goes to the jobs that can't be done remotely. I think there's this real concern about letting some people remote, if not everybody can remote, and how is that fair, and how do I think it through, and especially in areas where you have not been put under a shelter-in-place mandate. Well, in New Jersey, we are in a shelter-in-place mandate, which is a different level of change. But where you haven't been put in a shelter-in-place mandate and or it's a job that is deemed essential, this is another way to get at this. There is the way to split people into A and B teams where they can have more social distancing. So it's not just about remote work, and that seems to be the real primary focus, but there really is flexibility in time and place as well. You can shift when people start and when they stop, to allow some more distancing. And again, it really is being creative and helping managers think it through. I think this is where they're getting stuck, and that could be a step that could move them forward. The next one is prioritize use of available IT hardware and software. And why I'm sharing this one is I am seeing a lot of sharing of best practice strategies from people who have managed distributed teams for like 15 years, and they're sort of very kind of master level remote team management skills. And it's super inspiring to somebody like me who gets it and understands what that means. I think it can be a little overwhelming for a manager who has just never managed a flexible remote team before to expect them to take on these higher order level remote leadership strategies. So wherever you can, especially as relates to using technology, allow people to start with the technology they're used to, what they've already been using. I get nervous when I see starting people to add on these new platforms for coordination when they're still just getting used to figuring out what kind of work they can do remotely and how to get the job done with already the tools they know. So again, just to get people started, let them use what they have. Start with that, and then you can layer on some of these other higher level skills and tools. The next one is to set up a communications protocol. And what really that is I think a lot of the stress is around how are we going to communicate with each other? What tools are we going to use? What does that look like in terms of one-on-one and then group communication? And you guys know this as well as I do, one of the hardest social norms to break with any kind of remote work is this fear of, if I don't see somebody, they're not working, I don't want to interrupt them. just keep interrupting each other. Just let people know they can reach out, encourage them to do it. They'll break that fear very quickly. And just assume everybody is working unless otherwise stated. And then redirect the work. I think this is where teams can work together. Be creative about what you think you could do remotely versus what you can't. Challenge some of those initial biases. And, look, Brad and Jennifer and Victoria are holding your meetings on a Zoom call. Well, you know what? Could you thought you'd have done that? Maybe not. So again, be creative, redirect the work, and then optimize the work. I know there are a lot of organizations that are being forced to furlough, are reducing schedules, and that's not optimal, but understandable. But there is a lot to be said for this period of time, using it to use that sort of back burner work that just never gets done, that can set you up then for, again, when this is over, to be ready to hit the ground running. So again, think about how to optimize some of this white space that opens up if there are things that can't be redirected, so that again, you can keep people productive and supporting the business and setting yourself up for when this phase is over. Okay, Jennifer, if you want to go to the next screen. Okay, so now these are the steps that I'm sharing after you've gotten things set up. So we just went through sort of those real basic get started setup steps that if you give them to a manager who has never done this before, it can help them think it through and not get overwhelmed. This is once they get it set up, what are you going to be doing? So continually prioritize and check in. So why is this important? Oh, and even if it feels like micromanaging. So 9 times out of 10, when I go into organizations, I get managers asking me this question: how do I know if they're working if I can't see them? Okay, which, fine. My answer is always the same. Well, it shouldn't be any different than how you are knowing they're working now. Like, how are you measuring them? What are you gauging their performance against? What are your priorities? And I got to say, I get a lot of blank stares, because truly this is not happening in a real meaningful way in most organizations. And this is going to force the issue. So you can start them by just beginning to set up some cadence of check-ins one-on-one and with the team, and together start to prioritize what work is going to matter right now. Not everything can be a priority in this crisis situation. Teams really do have to maybe pick 2 or 3 things they're going to really try to focus on together. And then once they've figured out how to do that, then they can add other things on. But start that kind of ongoing, regular, I check in with the team, I check in one-on-one, and also leave some room for fun stuff, the personal fun stuff. That initially could feel like you're sort of checking up on me and you're not trusting that I'm getting the work done, but really that cadence, that check-in cadence, is what has to replace everybody being together. So again, that's a step that can help leaders begin to feel a little more comfortable in embracing the remote and flexible work. Then shift your productivity mindset. I really want to talk about this with all of you because it's something that I'm getting a little bit concerned about, how to help organizations make this productivity transition in a crisis period. Because I'll give you an example. I got a call yesterday to be a guest on an internal podcast for a company, and they wanted the topic to be how to maintain productivity and engagement during the coronavirus crisis remote response that we have. And I said, I just think you need to be careful with that, because right this minute, people are still figuring out how they're fitting everything together. They're still getting set up. They're trying to understand this new normal. They're figuring out how to communicate with each other. And you just want to be mindful that keeping the pre-coronavirus crisis productivity metrics as the bar right now could be more detrimental than if you just figured out a different way to think about productivity. It could be as simple as, let's just keep it going. Let's just keep people contributing as much as we can. And get us going, and then we can each week sort of look at how we can begin to get to a different level of productivity. But I really would love to hear what you're all seeing with this and how you're handling, because I think this is a tricky moment for leaders to try to keep people going and doing what they can, but at the same time showing some compassion that this is truly monumental and people are still wrapping their brains around it, and you want to honor that. That brings me to the next one: accepting imperfect remote workspaces and practices. This goes back to some of the best practice sharing that I'm seeing. People sharing their sort of best practices for remote work and, you know, working in your home office. And, you know, again, you have a lot of people that are doing this for the first time. They don't have the perfect setup. They are doing this with like other people in their environment that are also trying to go to school and also trying to work. And I get concerned that if we don't adjust those best practices a little bit to acknowledge this current reality, that people may be hesitant to communicate and be accessible and contribute until it is perfect, which may never be. So, you know, I'll be full disclosure. This morning I had a client meeting, and my dog is senile and is not adjusting to my new temporary apartment situation here. And so in the middle of the call, she just starts barking at nothing. There was nothing to bark at. And so I had to get up, pick her up, come over, put her on my lap, and have the rest of the call with my dog on my lap. I mean, it was so not best practice. That is not remote work best practice at all. But, you know, we had to go with it because that's the way it is. And finally, it's really important, I think, to try to capture some of this learning that's happening in real time. There are a number of ways you can do it, but find a way to just sort of touch base on a regular cadence with various constituents, with managers, with employees, and get a sense of what's happening. What's their experience? What's working? What's not? What would they like to see done differently once you're on the other side of all of this? And use this hopefully to motivate a shift to a more culture-based approach to flexibility and how, when, and where work is done. And I just want to share what my hope is and what I hope this ultimately leads to. And then I'd love to get into a conversation. So Jennifer, if you want to go to the next slide. So what I'm hoping is we get from where most organizations were when we went into this crisis to where I hope we ultimately end up, which will actually make, if God forbid we ever find ourselves in this situation again, will make the pivot to a remote response a lot easier for organizations. So in my experience, where most organizations were going into this crisis, is there's a real siloed approach to technology, to flexibility, and to workspaces, both on and off site. There wasn't a coordination to those three levers to execute work. And what I hope this does is the forced experiment with remote work. So, you know, again, the organizations I typically work with, these are groups that are thoughtfully and deliberately and voluntarily shifting to a more culture-based approach to flexibility, but now they've been forced to reimagine how, when, and where work can be done. I'm hoping what that does is open the conversation to take a more thoughtful and deliberate approach and think about how to give employees, teams, and managers the skills and tools to be able to intentionally, with thoughtful strategic intention, leverage the work flexibility, the technology, and the workspaces available to them on and off site to answer the question, what do we need to do, and how, when, and where do we do it best? So, for example, the organizations I know of that are able to do that, that pivot to high performance flexibility wasn't even, you know, it wasn't completely flawless, but it was much easier than some of the other organizations where that was not the case. So Jennifer, if you could go to the next slide, I'll be more specific about what that would look like. So what I mean by a culture-based approach to flexibility is the determination of how, when, and where work is going to be done is guided by a common set of guardrails, which are principles and a process. It's not a policy or a program or a set of rules. It really is a common approach to considering how to leverage the flexibility that makes sense for a particular job, a particular business, a particular person, how to leverage the technology that people would be using to implement that flexibility, and then where would that work be done most effectively, on-site and off-site. And again, the consistency would come from the shared principles and the common process, and not necessarily from actual outcomes. You will have many different types and combinations of time, space, place, process, pace, to execute the work. But again, the way you got there would be the same. And what that requires, it is going to require a shared leadership model. So often I get called by organizations to say, oh, can you come and train our managers to manage flexibility? And you know, managers just are one piece of that puzzle. A manager cannot really do this alone. It really does start with each person, and each person being able to think through, what do I need to get done? And how, when, and where do I do it best, not only on my job and also in my personal life? And then taking that determination to the team and coordinating with the team, and the team figuring out how, when, and where the work is going to get done given the current realities. And then the manager's role in that is to really be clear about what's expected, making sure they're setting clear expectations, they're getting updates, they're holding people accountable, they're coaching, they're coordinating, and being open to new and creative, flexible ways of getting the job done, and then helping recalibrate should realities change. But they're doing that in partnership with their people and with their teams. And again, I will say that my experience in this crisis is the organizations that had that in place, the transition to this complete remote situation was, again, not perfect, but it was much easier. And their people understand and have the skills and tools to understand now how to reset their work-life fit in this new reality and be intentional about when they're working and when they're managing the other parts of their lives, and then how to coordinate with their teammates that are in the same situation. So you don't have a manager now that's just like, okay, I have all these people everywhere. They don't know what to do. I'm trying to figure out what to do. I can't tell it. There's an organization and an order to it. And then finally, Jennifer, the next and final, and then I'd love to hear from all of you. And then finally, really, ultimately, what I hope we get to is that flexibility, this culture-based approach to flexibility is actually part of a broader ecosystem that is aligned around it so that it truly can be executed in a strategic, intentional way to address the challenges of the business. So for example, right now, the strategy of an organization in many cases right now has to be not only managing through this crisis, but also how to hold on to and manage their labor at this point. And so flexibility can help you do that. So it's not just managing the response to the crisis, but then also how you manage talent. It's the same strategy addressing two issues at the same time. So again, this is what I'm currently sharing with organizations as they make this pivot. Those were the top 10 steps and tips I've been sharing. And again, that last one being, let's learn from this, as hard as it might be, so that we can take those insights and hopefully use it to actually make flexibility in the way work is done an even more integrated part into the cultural DNA of an organization and the strategic decision making. So with that, let's talk. I want to hear what you guys have to say.
Okay, great. Cali, thank you so much for sharing that expertise with us. And we're excited to engage you all in a conversation here. As you're each thinking about the questions that you have to ask, we do have a couple of questions that we wanted to get started with Cali, and then we'll invite you either to use the chat feature if you'd prefer to type in your questions, or if you can signal to us, and I'm going to ask Victoria to help with facilitating this, and then we'll get you on board to ask your questions, okay? So I'm going to start first based on what some of our members had put in as topics that they're interested in. So for managers who've been reluctant to or resistant to remote work in the past, and we all know many who fall into that category, how do we best support these people now when they have no choice but to have their employees work remote for all of the time?
Yeah, so I know this is going to sound surprising. I have a special place in my heart for managers who are resistant to this, because I just know that it's just fear on some level. And so I always think the way to help them get over their fear is to give them as much specific guidance as you can, and just really lay out step by step what will help them. And again, that's why I go back to those tips that I've been saying, those first 5 for managers, just, and keep it simple. I get and I've said this already, but I want to say it again. I'm getting nervous that when we go out with sort of these distributed team, best practice, master strategies, it's too much for these managers who've never done it before. They get overwhelmed, especially just trying to navigate through this crisis. And so if you could sort of bring it down to the basics and get them started, I have found if they are supported and encouraged, that they will make it through to the other side. They will figure it out. So again, you can make it as simple as possible. They will, and they have to. I mean, right now they just have to do it. So let's give them as much support as possible. And I'm going to tell you, if you do that, they can sometimes become your biggest champions, because they've gotten over their fears and they just feel great about it. And so again, you may find at the end, some of your most resistant managers are actually really your champions now.
On the conference call.
Brad, did you want to follow up on that? I think that's kind of one of the questions you were planning to ask.
Yeah, sure. Just want to comment that I'm a little disappointed at how many people don't have their video camera on. You know, come on. And one other comment, Melissa from Harvard, are you there? A minute ago, hi Melissa, a minute ago, you were sitting in the courtyard of the Isabel Stewart Gardner Museum. What happened? That was your background. Did you know that?
Yeah, I know. I don't know why it changed. I didn't flip the switch. That's funny.
Okay, just really appreciating that. I thought your office was in the courtyard. I was really.
I wish.
I was super impressed. Anyway, so Cali, we've been supporting telework at the center for a very long time, but it's only in the last week that we've started to use Zoom so extensively, with everybody using cameras. Yep, there's a few more cameras going on. Thank you, folks. And I honestly feel that that's added a lot. So I wonder if you think that this utilization of cameras so that people can see each other and interact more will increase acceptance of this way of working. And then the second part of the question is, do you think it will lead to fewer people teleworking in their pajamas?
So I have a funny story about that one. Okay, I actually think video conferencing is very, very important. I think it gets over a lot of the concerns about losing that interaction that people miss when they're not together. I do think that this is going to force people to get on board with video conferencing. I cannot tell you, I had a recent client launch where I did a test with senior leadership, and this is before the coronavirus. I said, you know what, I'm going to do my interviews with you they have Blue Jeans is their system. Barely any of them could get onto the Blue Jeans system. They didn't know how to do it. Somebody had to do it for them. They did it. And it was a test for me to understand what their personal acceptance level of using video conferencing was. Now, I've subsequently checked in and they are all doing it and they're all using it. But since they weren't doing it and they weren't using it, it wasn't going to be widely adopted across the organization, because anytime anybody would say, oh, can we do this video conferencing meeting, which by the way, younger people are very savvy with this and have no problem with it. But if they were to suggest that, you'd have a senior leader who's like, I don't know how to do it. I don't want to do it. No. But I think we're over that. And I think you're going to see the adoption just really take off. And I do think it's going to make a huge difference in terms of how we support telework. Now, again, I think we're going to start at the basic level, like just getting on, right? But I do think there are ways to take this to the next level, polling questions and really great ways to add the interactivity, which will be exciting to explore going forward. But I do think that it's going to change it. Now, to the funny story about pajamas. So there's a great guy, Bob Sutton on Twitter. He's a professor at Stanford. Bob Sutton, Work Matters. He's great.
Another name.
So he put out on Twitter last week, he said, hey, just facilitated my first Zoom class with most of my students in bed, and they thought it was awesome. And I'm like, hey, this is going to be interesting to have a whole generation of workers getting ready to hit the workplace who just finished college in bed. And there's going to have to be some, I think, after the crisis, best practice level setting as to, maybe not bed. I don't know if bed's going to be okay, but that's where they are right now. So
very good. Thank you.
All right, great. I have one more question on a topic that's come up a whole lot lately. So many employees, traditionally their caregiving responsibilities have been invisible to the workplace, but this working from home and having children and elders and other people that need care in the home at the same time is making that very evident to workplaces. So can you speak to, what can we do to support those employees who are also caregivers during this time?
So this goes back to my point around revising some of those work from home best practices. Again, in normal times, yes, it all applies. Trying to find a place that has a door and has limited distractions. I think about that video of the guy who was on the BBC and his toddler ran in. That was just horrible. People were like, oh, you shouldn't do that. Like you should have. Well, now it's got to be okay. I think we have to allow parents to try to find a way to separate when they're trying to work and when their children are in their environment. But I just think to make that a rule is unrealistic and puts a lot of pressure on parents. I do think this is a good time for organizations to try to just give supports and best practices and share best practices with other parents and give parents some bandwidth to figure out how to fit this all together and know that it isn't perfect, it's okay. I really would love to hear from the group what you're doing, and I really would love to hear how you are trying to help parents find that fit in a really, really rough set of circumstances. Because I do think that they can do it. I just think they need some extra support and a little leeway.
Yeah, especially now. I mean, we've got daycare centers closed.
Yeah.
Schools are closed. I mean, if organizations can't be flexible around these issues at this point in time, they never will be. So I do think this is time to say, everybody do your best,
And Mace, and it's one caution that a leader said to me recently, and I heard what he was saying, but I think it's something to think about. It goes back to sort of, what's the next phase in all this? He's just like, I know, but like, is this the way it's going to be forever? Like, am I always are the kids always going to have to be around? And I'm just like, no, this is a unique situation, and there is going to have to be a recalibration on the other side of this. And you can address how to handle those best practices again once we're on the other side. I don't think this is now a full wholesale change. However, I do think it's finally showing the world that work and life are the same. I think we kind of all walked around that there was this separation, and it really isn't. And maybe that's humanizing things a little bit, but it's okay once this is over to reset what all that best practice should look like.
Yeah. Susan, I think I saw you raising your hand, Susan from Yale. Were you raising your hand, Susan, or did I? Oh, you're muted. You're unmuted.
Okay. So I actually just sent the question.
Hi.
Hi, everybody. Thank you, Callie. This has been
Hi, it's good to see you.
everybody. It's really nice to be connected this way. These are fabulous. And I'm finding what's interesting, this isn't my question, but what's interesting about Zoom is even doing social, happy hours with friends that
Yep.
aren't really in the work world, and they're really loving the Zoom technology. So we've had it at Yale for quite a while. So it's nice to see everybody else joining us. But I did have a question. So,
Yes.
what's coming up, especially for people that are living alone and aging individuals who might not be current with technology. I never needed a cell phone. I never wanted that Facebook thing. I've been looking for websites or ways to help direct people, but I haven't been very successful. So if anyone, Callie, or anyone on the call knows of a quick way that we could get people to not be afraid,
Yeah.
to try that.
Can I tell you my favorite?
Please.
Peer-to-peer mentoring, and especially intergenerational mentoring, can be very powerful. You have some of these younger employees that are very versed in some of this technology. Sitting with a colleague who maybe isn't, and having them walk them through just even the basics,
Mm-hmm.
and then giving everybody permission to just pilot it. Just putting it out there. We're all trying. It's not going to be perfect. It's okay. That's why I feel like some of this sort of, let's go to the best practices of what everybody who's got the master level of, just keep some of that from happening. Yeah. So, take a couple weeks at least where let's just get everybody on the same level of basic adoption, and then you can take it up. But I think this intergenerational best practice sharing can be really kind of cool. I find.
If I could just add, Kelly, I mean, that sounds like a long-term strategy, but if you look over there, that person right there, Victoria, can you see her? Jennifer and I look like we know what we're doing, but if it weren't for that person over there, Victoria, then none of this would be happening. And it's so long, this idea of reverse mentoring, every department probably has some young person, no matter where they are or who they are, they have some young person who is really good at this stuff. And I wouldn't have a clue how to do it. But in a week's time, we've come a long way. So reach out to the person in your department who's youngest and who has the most, seems to have the most technological savvy. I was wondering that question, Susan, it's a good question. Are there any sites that people can go to? Like, I've found myself using Facebook, and I had kind of gotten away from Facebook for months and months, and I find myself using that stuff more now because it's a way to reach out.
It's a way to stay connected.
Are there any people on the call, anybody who knows, like, there's a good site if you want tutorials or things like that on how to use these kind of social media tools?
I guess lynda.com, which is now taken over by LinkedIn. That's a good one. I'm actually going to add that. Thank you.
What is that called again?
It's called Lynda. It used to be lynda.com.
It's now LinkedIn Learning.
LinkedIn Learning. At least for Yale employees, it's free for us. I don't know if you're a LinkedIn member, if you get it automatically, but it's been around a number of years, and it is a great place for tutorials. So thank you for reminding me of that. That's a great thing, I think, for all of us to promote to our staff.
Anybody else have no tools like that? Nancy, you know a tool? Nancy Kastikian, are you muted? You're unmuted, Nancy.
Hi, Nancy.
Thank you, and thank you, Kelly. We used some of Kelly's quotes from one of her recent emails, which were beautifully written. With her permission, use them in this telework continuity toolkit that we put together. Kelly, we're getting really good feedback about it.
Oh, great. I'm so glad.
I wanted to say that I do think that this is leveling the playing field for a lot of people. So for example, we have teachers, we have professors teaching from their homes now, and they have kids underfoot, and they are but they're getting really high marks. And I think, how cool is that to see your professor, like, in her house or whatever, So I think it humanizes leaders, it humanizes each other, it kind of, breaks down some of the barriers between generations in some ways. It exposes vulnerabilities. I'm really super early adopter of technology, but every time we've converted over to like Skype and then Zoom, so many other people are actually setting things up for me that I actually am slow to learn. And so I think that's another issue with senior leaders, that we kind of need to get in and help them do it. But the tools that I'm finding also kind of useful are the tools themselves that have their guides. Like, they have their own, start here, do that. I'm sure
Yep.
some are better than others, but and I don't know about other places, but I think at our IT group has a whole bunch of tutorials. So I would also just go to your own company and see what they've got, what they've already posted, because they've already curated it.
Great. Thank you, Nancy.
Great.
Other
We have a question here from Karen Pernstein. Karen, do you want to share that? I'm trying to unmute you, but you must be muted on your own.
There you go.
Hi, everybody. So my question is a dynamic that exists for normal conditions, which is that blurred line between work and non-work hours. And so now that we're in this temporary situation, I think more people are expressing concerns about, how do you create some boundaries? And I'd love to hear from Cali or others about any tips that they're giving to their teams.
Well, I can tell you, again, this goes back to that communications protocol, sort of when are we communicating with each other? And I think a communications protocol should be sort of hierarchical ranking of the different modes of communication. Like, when are we communicating with each other and what are we using to communicate at different levels and for different reasons? And then also kind of rules around expectations of responsiveness and accessibility, and setting that up front, I think, gives people comfort. Try not to send emails after a certain time, but if you really need to reach me, you can text me or you can call me on my phone. Just making sure everybody's coming at this from the same place. And I actually think that helps in the normal times too. There is not enough of that. We don't make that clear. And just even as simple as control when your emails are going out, unless they're urgent, by just using the send later button. I mean, just as simple as that. But yeah, that's having that up front, I think, can help. I'd love to hear what other people think.
Other thoughts? Just wave your hand and we can, for those of you who are on screen. I mean, on the other side of the fence, just one quick thing is sometimes, and this, one thing that drives me crazy is if I say I'm working from home and then the people who work with me apologize for bothering.
That's the interrupting. I know.
Yeah, I think we always think about the blurred lines in terms of, people invading my personal space at like 7 o'clock at night or on weekends or things like that. But from the other side of the coin, I think, if you're working from home, then you better have a phone number and an email and whatever.
Totally.
You're connected, and nobody should be apologizing to you for calling you at home.
No.
And so we just got to get into this, this give and take thing, where yes, we shouldn't be bothering people on weekends if they're working from home, but you are not bothering people if it's Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 or whatever. So
Yep.
Just a thought.
Yep.
I think we have other questions.
Right. Yeah, we have some other questions. Stephanie, would you like to ask your question? Stephanie Downs?
Sure. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, sincere apologies that I am not capable of showing my video. I do hope at a future date I can get to meet you guys, via video.
Sure.
So that being said, I really appreciate and have found the discussion so far very helpful. A quick question, Callie, in regards to something you mentioned early on in the presentation. It had to do with kind of doing this assessment of understanding which jobs are more conducive to working flexibly, et cetera, and taking the time to go through an exercise like that.
Mhm.
I'm wondering though, do you find that approach as being more helpful versus an approach where you really want to adopt in the organization just a culture of working flexibly? So as opposed to, for instance, we have a lot of course, shop employees that we have to think about,
Mhm.
technicians, etc. And so there's this sense of we've got a population of employees who think that they, don't have access to flexibility.
Mhm.
And so so again, is it really more beneficial to think about it from a job um, perspective and which jobs are more conducive to working flexibly versus do you find it the better approach being focusing on, how do we just work towards having a culture of flexibility and having a myriad of ways of working
Yes.
flexibly that can be conducive to both hourly as well as exempt employees.
Okay.
That would be a both and.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
What I was that part of that first tip was in this sort of moment where people are transitioning rapidly to remote
Got
work,
you.
right?
Got
So
you.
that's just like right
Okay.
now, people
Yeah.
got to work remotely. Like what? Okay. So ultimately, where I had that continuum, where I had the the core where it was coming to Venn diagram.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's why it's everything. It's looking at time, space, place, process, pace, and figuring out what's going to work for a particular job. So the
Mm-hmm.
consistency would be in that process of figuring that out. So
Mm-hmm.
everybody's following the same process to figure it out. What that's going to look like is going to be
Mm-hmm.
different based on different people,
Mm-hmm.
different jobs, different businesses, but the approach is the same. And so you're absolutely right. So figuring out what would work for your shop employees versus, let's say, the people in your accounting department is going to be the same process, but how that would ultimately look in implementation is going to look different. And
Okay.
you're absolutely right. So I'm going to say both and.
Yep.
Okay. Okay. Excellent. And one other quick question, if I may. So with regards to, you mentioned supporting managers, and one of the key things is oftentimes you see it as being just fear of the unknown. And so, giving them specific guidelines, but keeping that simple, I think was great tip. I'm wondering from the viewpoint of an employee, I personally have been noticing some employees who feel very isolated, and say that they're struggling just not
Mhm.
having the interaction. And just wondering if you've come across any helpful guidance, tips, resources that might be useful for employees who do, I don't want to stereotype by MBTI, but we use that a lot within Cummins. And so, I tend to see more extroverts,
Yes.
making these comments. So for me, I'm like, I'm fine, but I tend
Yes.
to be more introvert, that sort of thing. So any thoughts around, that, Callie, or anyone on the line for that matter?
Well, I want to hear from everybody else. 'Cause I don't want to be the only one saying anything, but I will say this goes back to that communications protocol, and it
Uh-huh.
can be, you can make a diagram that includes.
Oh, I think Callie's voice faded out here.
Yeah, I was gonna say I didn't hear anymore.
Yeah, we can't hear you right now, Callie.
Hear me now?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
Okay. All right. Sorry about that. So can you let me know if you can't hear me? Okay. It seems to be working. But in that protocol, that communication protocol, you can build in ways of informally communicating with each other. You can create a Slack channel that people can go on. You can create, standing, actually, this is funny. People do this. More extroverted people two people can log on to, or a work team can log on to Zoom and just be logged on and just working. And so they're
Right.
almost like created their own little like virtual work pod together,
Mhm.
and they can just be talking to each other and be able to. So there are many different ways you can do it. You know, be creative.
Mhm.
Encourage them to be creative.
So, Mary Fox, I just wanted to bring you into this because your comment earlier question was related. So, would you like to share your thoughts?
Sure. I'm on day 8 of working remotely and I'm exhausted. Like I am. I get a lot of energy from working with people. That's
Right.
Myers-Briggs. And it's, you know, I come home from work and I'm da 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 da. My
Mhm.
husband comes home at the end of the day and he goes, "How was your day?" I'm like, "Oh my God, I just gotta like, I don't know." Like I'm just exhausted. I know it sounds crazy, but I just am. I am lacking the energy that I have when I'm with other people. I could just take a nap right now.
This is Karen. I just want to make a comment if I can about that because I work in a technology organization and there is a real thing called Zoom fatigue, which is not to be taken lightly. But the experience of being on Zoom meetings is not the same
It
as
is not.
and the advice that like the Zoom people have given us as a technology organization is to cut your meetings in half where you can. There's different about physiologically about being on a Zoom call. I have felt the same way. I've been completely fried by 1 o'clock.
I've been on calls from 8:30 this morning, interviews with candidates and meetings with teams and webinars to learn, you know, about the different laws that are happening now with leaves. And I'm just exhausted.
Mhm.
You know, I'm just really, I can't, it's so funny. And I'm usually, I mean, the comment that most people make about me is I just have all this energy and I just keep going. And I get it from others and just that interaction. And it's just, I think I have to go grocery shopping.
So is there a way for you
And
in
stay
your
6
own
feet apart.
personal work-life fit, is there a way for you to build in some interaction in your day? Obviously there's the social distancing that makes this a little bit harder, but even if it's, I know I'm an extrovert and I have a girlfriend who's an extrovert, and we actually will take walks 6 feet apart from each other and just literally talk for an hour. And I find that's enough.
Right.
Kind of
I
keep me
think that's
going.
a great idea. I got to make an effort. And again, it's that old, you know, I hate to stereotype me in a million things, but that old school of, you know, you keep working and you don't take a break and, you know, that kind of thing. But I mean, I think for my effectiveness, I'm going to have to.
Yeah.
Because I'm just, I'm very fortunate normally in working in human resources that have a lot of stimulus being around people. And so I was attracted to this field for that. But this is one of those aspects of it where you got to now be a little creative of how you, tools and technology are great and I'm not at all afraid of them. They're just not doing it quite for me.
You know, I think this brings up a good point about intentionality and the skills that your people need. Knowing how to manage your work-life fit just normally is a skill that people need and they don't have. There's an intentionality just in how we manage this in general. And in this moment in time, having that ability to think through what is it I need to do and how, when, and where do I need to get it done is even more critical for putting boundaries around what has no boundaries now. So if you find your people are struggling, just sort of give them some of those basic tools around, you know, just even keep a shared calendar. You know, this is one of the basic work-life fit how-tos that I think makes all the difference, is just put your work and your personal to-dos on the same calendar. And this is what I learned and what I put in Tweak It, which is the secrets of the work-life fit naturals, are they keep these shared calendars and they put the most granular priorities on the calendar. And that's how they put boundaries around their work and their life and how they allocate their energy and time. And when you have physical boundaries of the workplace, maybe that's not so pressing, but man, when that goes away and then you add into it, you got to figure out how to teach your kids and get your stuff done and manage it. Even more so, there needs to be this intentionality and putting those things in that feed you, that putting a boundary around work and making sure that you're doing the things that are going to keep you feeling your best in a very difficult time, it's even more important. And encourage your people to do that. What are the things that feed you, that fill your soul and make you feel good? And tell them to just put them in their calendar. 5 small things that you are going to commit to do every day, and put them down, and then really encourage them to do it. It's so, so important.
I think we have a comment from the person who's logged in as Jeremy's iPhone. Did you want to
Oh.
share with us? I'm not sure.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, that's me.
And
Hello.
can you tell us your name?
No, oh yeah, always with my name, but that is my name,
Okay.
Jeremy. So yeah, I'm having connection issues, so I use my iPhone for all of my Zoom calls and my laptop for notes. And anyway, it's besides the point. So I was going to say, conversely, to Mary's comment, is that I feel like I am talking so much more now to people than I ever did in the office. Almost too much. I'm a little introverted myself, so it's like all of these Zoom meetings are draining me in a different sense. Like I feel like I just have no alone time, even though I'm very alone. It's a really weird place to be. I also have my toddler here with me, so it's a very interesting balance, but I get fatigued just by interacting like all day long on the Zoom calls. So I just wanted to share that converse side of things.
Another reason to maybe clarify putting some boundaries around some of these Zoom calls if they're too much. Like, so that's interesting that the actual Zoom people are saying cut the calls in half. I did not know that. So, you know, maybe there are some best practices that are emerging around getting consensus within a team. Maybe there's some boundaries around the Zoom calls, and we're going to put some sort of deep thinking time on the calendar where we're all just going to agree, if you need each other, we'll Slack each other, we'll message each other, but otherwise we're just going to focus and do some work. You know, this is where this team component of this is so important, where everybody is coordinating with each other and communicating with each other as to what's going to be most effective for the team, and just keep reviewing that because it's going to evolve. So, but that's an interesting, yeah, maybe there's too much. So.
Cali, I want to be respectful of your time because we're getting close to 1 p.m. Do you have a few extra?
I do.
Because we did have a few other comments. So Nancy, I don't know if you wanted to share what
can I just say my children and my husband may be coming back, okay? Because there are 4 adults in this tiny apartment trying to remote work, and they have been sent out for lunch with the senile dog, okay? And everybody may be coming back. So you may all say hi. Hello.
Okay, Nancy, you had a comment about the categorization of the jobs.
Yeah, sort of. Well, yes. Yeah, well, I was thinking about, and wondering if anybody, or Kelly, if you can say anything about what feels more and more like a class issue to me. We're talking about telework, 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 telework. It's the new norm. It's, you know, we're giving you all these tools. It's great, telework. And then there are all these essential employees. Mm-hmm. And often they are our lowest paid workers, the custodians, the dining service workers, the first responders, all of this stuff. And I don't know how to have, I'm silent. We as an organization, I think, are silent about what we're doing for these people because, to be honest, we're trying to work behind the scenes, but we're not there yet. So in the meantime, we're broadcasting how we're supporting telework, but there's this other reality that we're not talking about.
So Nancy, what do you guys do? Are you doing sort of the A/B teaming where you're, you know, kind of splitting them up into smaller teams where you're trying to spread them out, or?
I have no idea.
Oh, you have no idea?
No, I'm not.
Okay.
No.
Yeah.
But so I'm sure that there are some very good practices that are going on.
Yep.
There's something about the messaging. It's kind of like,
I agree with you. That's why I'm nervous. I think it needs to be flexible in remote work. I really do, because it's not just about remote. It's really about time. I think there's going to be more parents that are going to need to split when they're on, meaning you may have people who work for you who are going to have to log on at 6 in the morning until 11, and then they're going to have to go dark between 11 and 2, and then they'll log back on from 3 to 7. You know, I think we need to your point around the, you know, other categories of workers where maybe they can't do any kind of remote, but there is a way to sort of break their teams up and switch them around so that there are fewer of them on a shift, so there's more social distancing that can happen. And I think we miss that when we just talk about the remote work. I really do. I'm in full agreement with you. I agree.
Thank you.
I just want to say that here at Yale, I know that at least with our public safety, police, security department, and then also we have an on-site health health plan, which is inpatient plus outpatient. The leadership there to address the childcare problems has really kind of done exactly what you're saying, Callie, where they're maybe looking at schedules differently. Maybe that someone that used to work in the day might now be working at night, and vice versa.
Yep.
And kind of on a one-by-one basis. But my concern, because we have most of our childcare centers in Connecticut are closed, and you know, as everybody around the country is struggling, my concern is like today's kind of quiet, but I'm anticipating this burnout. One of those essential critical people. Two, people are maybe getting sick.
Yes,
So
I
it's
know.
not. So that's why it's almost like it really is kind of such a work in progress as long as we go. But I was happy to hear that some of those departments instituted that, and also having people work remotely. I'm not sure what they're having them do, and I think it is a fear. You know, no students are here, so I'm sure there's a fear of job loss and lots of things like that. That you know, I hear anecdotally, but I think we're going to start to hear more and more about that as well.
Yep.
Just a quick comment too, that I'll add from a Cummins perspective, because we've been challenged by this as well. And what I've noticed in recent communications from leadership is they've really tried to harness and focus the communication on our value of caring and be specific in regards to how they are strategically making decisions where it would appear we might be showing preference to our, you know, hourly office and exempt employees by allowing them or requiring them at this point to work from home, yet we have factories that we can't shut down, and we're managing through employees feeling, you know, isolated. Why do we have to come to work, that sort of thing. And so one of the ways, you know, like I say, I've seen Cummins leadership try to address that is by really leveraging our value of caring, being more specific in regards to the work that these folks are doing on the front line and how much their support and their efforts are appreciated, and specifically saying, you know, what the end results are as to how they're impacting, you know, all that's going on. You know, as an example, you know, our engines are used in, you know, the healthcare industry right now, and that's those sorts of things. So I think, you know, that's certainly an approach that companies can take with regards to communications that leaders are sending out at this time.
All right, thank you. Well, I just want to really extend our heartfelt thanks to Callie. She was ready and willing when Brad reached out to her to come and speak with us today. And thank you for your tips. We will be sharing those with people, you know, after the call with some follow-up materials. I also just wanted to remind everyone on the call that we do have a number of resources that we've been collecting that are available on our website. They include tip sheets about remote working for both managers and employees. You are more than welcome to use those, distribute those to people within your organization, and we're continuing to update these resources on a regular basis. Thank you, Victoria. And I also wanted to encourage you, if you're finding great websites or videos or other resources, please send us an email and we can add those to the list of items that we're putting together. So we really want to be here to support all of our members through this. I just very quickly, we had sent out a flexible and remote work benchmarking survey. I am going to send out a reminder about that with a link. We extended the deadline to March 30th, but as you all can see, this is a very relevant conversation to our moment now, and we're hoping to get more members. We have, I believe, 16 responses out of our 50 members so far, so there's definitely plenty of room for improvement there. So I hope you will contribute to that, and we will share the results of that with members. And then just wanted to make you aware of our continuing series of events that we have coming up. Next Tuesday for our roundtable members, we're having an open forum discussion on childcare, and I know that briefly came up today, but that will be the focus of that entire hour next Tuesday. On Thursday, we're opening up our BC Work and Family Association meeting to everyone, and that's going to be on the topic of BRGs and how they contribute to inclusion and belonging. And then the following Wednesday, we have Professor Hokan Okzelik from Sacramento State, and he is an expert on loneliness in the workplace, and we've asked him to speak specifically to the issue of loneliness and social isolation that we may be all experiencing at this time. And we're in the process of scheduling some more sessions. So thanks again to Cali today, and thanks to all of you for participating. I've really been enjoying these sessions just as a way to connect with the other members, and I hope you're all able to learn from these interactions as well. Feel free to reach out to us at any time if you have questions, and hopefully we'll see some of you on the events next week. So have a great afternoon.